So, now that we got the boring character bios out of the way, let's talk about the first thing you may notice about the show, the animation. Along with Mucha Lucha and a few others, this is one of the earliest shows to use Adobe Flash, or back then it was called Macromedia Flash, as opposed to hand-drawn animation or 3D CGI. Or, you know, the occasional stop motion, but that shit takes ages, man. I'm still waiting for that damn Chicken Run sequel. Nowadays, pretty much every show that's 2D animated uses this method of animation, now called puppet animation since most shows use Toon Boom rather than Flash. But back then, this was not something my 9-year-old brain was accustomed to, and it had almost a stop-motion feel, with the characters' rig-like motions. But with that said, this is actually pretty well animated for a show made in Flash. Whereas most other Flash shows look really stiff and unnatural, even if the art style is pleasant to look at, The Buzz on Maggie looks like a lot of time and care went into it to make it as smooth and cartoonishly exaggerated as possible, and it really pays off for a show where half the comedy is based around slapstick and needs good visual timing. The character designs are also pretty memorable. The designer who worked on this is Jorge Gutierrez, who previously worked on Mucha Lucha and would later create his own cartoon, El Tigre. His designs have a certain look, where they combine the cutesy look you'd expect from a children's cartoon, with the exaggerated features that every good cartoon should have. The Buzz on Maggie is no exception, as each character's design is unique, or at least the main characters are, and you can easily tell who's who and what they're like just by looking at them. You'll also notice it takes influence from the very early cartoons of the 1930s. Wow, God, it's nearly been 100 years. Where characters were basically rubber hoses with gloves, which I think is a nice callback. And it's even a little bit anime-esque at times, with some of the facial expressions. Although, is it me, or does Maggie's hairdo kind of rip off Shadow the Hedgehog? Not to mention the creator, Dave Polsky, worked on South Park at one point, so you can also see a little bit of influence from that show in the designs, especially with Mrs. Wingston, as I said earlier. One challenge I'd imagine Gutierrez and anyone else tasked with designing the characters would have to face was, how do you make dirty, disgusting insects look cute? Especially considering the main character is a preteen girl, which, let's be real, girls are notorious for not wanting to look ugly. And part of me thinks that could be the reason this show was made. Just for the joke of, look, hey look, here's a girl who's supposed to be cute and pretty, but she's a creature that's famously hideous. Have we got a show for you? This trope is by no means unique to The Buzz on Maggie. We've seen it with several characters before, such as Pearl the Whale, Miss Piggy, and I guess Princess Fiona when she's an ogre. Come on, everyone knows the ending of the first Shrek movie. Darth Vader's Luke's father, Hans wants to kill Anna, Rosebud was his sled, and Fiona's an ogre now, big deal. However, Maggie's design is pretty unique as far as the cute monster girl trope is concerned, as she has sort of a punk rock look, with a funky hairdo and her just good enough fashion sense. And speaking of Shrek comparisons, that brings me to my next point, the world building. Of course, this is a show where the main characters are flies, which are infamous for liking garbage, rotting food, and literal shit. So naturally this is worked into the show. Often the characters will eat rotten or mouldy versions of the foods we eat, whether it's fast food, gourmet cuisine, or a typical family meal, and it's just treated as perfectly normal in their world. And sure, we've seen this joke before in things like Shrek and the Addams Family, where doing gross and abhorrent stuff is part of the characters' daily lives, but again, it's executed decently here. And also seeing how they're flies, the town of Sticky Feet is located on a garbage dump, and the buildings are literally made from trash that the humans toss away. For residential homes, it can be anything like an old milk carton or a manky old boot. But public facilities are usually themed after what they're used for. For example, the school is made out of an old book, a folder and other school supplies, the cinema is an old movie projector, there's a coffee house made from a coffee mug, and somehow they managed to fit an ice skating rink inside, well, an ice skate. Is that just the entrance, similar to the Louvre and its glass pyramid door? See, little stuff like that helps to give the show its own unique identity and to help the show stand out. And now we cut to the main turning off factor for most people, the story. As I said before, the show is largely formulaic in its structure, where the majority of the episodes pretty much have the exact same plot, just with different scenarios and different locations. There's nothing inherently wrong with formulaic shows, and they've been around pretty much since at least the days of Tom and Jerry. And we've also had Scooby-Doo, Mona the Vampire, Fairly OddParents, King Arthur's Disasters, and even the critically acclaimed Phineas and Ferb, Dan vs. Lazy Town, and Miraculous Ladybug each have their own formulaic plots that they sneak into every episode. What matters is whether the formula is actually a gripping story that you'll want to come back to every episode. And with the buzz on Maggie, I personally don't mind the plot structure, as it did help me deal with adolescence growing up. But many have criticised the show for just being a typical tween sitcom with high school drama, stereotypical bully characters and all that stuff, but with anthropomorphic insects. If you're not sick and tired of that genre, or if you've never seen any shows in this genre, then you'll probably enjoy this show despite its plot structure. Now, since I'm a musician, hell, my channel was called ARC the Clarinet Master until recently, it would be remiss of me to not talk about the one thing everybody remembers about the buzz on Maggie. The theme song, Just the Way I Am.
I'm strange, and I like it. That's just the way I am. I can't change, I can't hide it. That's just the way I am.
Aside from being catchy as hell, it's definitely an interesting sounding song. The style is one I can best describe as a rock-pop fusion, which was admittedly quite popular in the mid-2000s when this show came out, and the lyrics do a decent job at describing what Maggie's character is like. Plus, the intro itself does a good job at establishing these characters, with Aldrin being a self-absorbed jock, Dawn being the alpha bitch, Eugene and Wendell as the nerds, and Bugspit being the strict teacher. The song is sung by Sky Sweetnam, a singer I really don't know much about, but from what I'm able to look up, she's a well-known Canadian singer who's well known for such singles as Billy S, Tangled Up in Me, and Number 1. No, not that one. She also sang the theme song for Wayside, another cartoon that gets heavily overlooked, and she starred in a short little anti-racism film. And listening to this song, I can definitely say she was the right choice. She captures the energy and spunk of an adolescent who's looking to express herself but has trouble finding her voice. Plus, it helps that she was actually a teenager when the show was made. So yeah, the theme song is fantastic and the intro complements it perfectly. Lastly, I should probably address the wetter in the room, and discuss the probable reasons why this show was cancelled. There are a number of theories as to how this happened, but nobody knows for certain. Some say it's because Disney wanted to make room for their live action stuff, while others say it failed because it failed on the international market, being particularly unpopular in the UK and Australia. Ironic, considering I'm Australian and I was obsessed with this show as a kid, but whatever, I don't speak for the 20 million people who lived here in 2006. However, one person on TV Tropes pointed out one likely contributing factor, and I think this was the main reason the buzz on Maggie flopped. You see, with the show aimed at a primarily preteen girl demographic, but mainly focusing on gross bugs doing gross things, which, let's be real, most girls aren't tomboys, or at least not the hyper-masculine tomboys you see on TV, so they're not really into gross stuff. So it most likely would have squeaked out the young female audience that this was trying to reach. However, because it did focus on tween girls doing tween girl stuff like shopping, slumber parties, trying to hook up with cute boys and all that girly schlock, that likely put off young boys from watching the show. So unlike shows such as Daria, Punky Brewster, Kim Possible, Hilda, and maybe Mona the Vampire, which appeal to both genders despite having a female protagonist, the buzz on Maggie appeals to none, barring a few dedicated fans such as myself. And that, I think, is probably the number one reason why the buzz on Maggie failed. It probably wasn't the only reason, and I think the reasons I listed above also played into it to varying degrees. But this was probably the big deciding factor that spelled doom for the show. Plus, a lot of people hate the buzz on Maggie for taking Kim Possible's time slot on the Disney Channel. It's a sad end to what could have been a fantastic and well-renowned show, and Disney did everything they could to sweep the show under the rug. No official DVD set has been released as of 2020. I did find this one website that claims to sell the Buzz on Maggie DVDs, but it appears to be illegal bootleg activity, if not an outright scam. The show is currently unavailable on Disney+, there's no merchandise that I know of, or at least none that's officially endorsed by Disney. Again. And even shortly after its cancellation, they moved it to air at 4 AM. making it virtually impossible to view without the aid of TiVo, Fox2IQ, and similar recording services. Or, you could just stay up late at night and mess up your sleep schedule. So it's fair to say that the Disney execs are pretty embarrassed by this show and don't ever want to see it come back. However, I still think there's potential. Maybe someday if this show ever gets a big enough following, we could potentially see a reboot in some form or another. And with the advent of the DuckTales reboot and Harvey Girls Forever, which is technically an adaptation rather than a reboot, but it feels like a reboot done right, especially since the source material was over half a century old, the animation industry has gained audience trust that reboots can succeed if done properly. And it would be cool to see these characters brought into the 2020s with societal changes and technological changes. Maybe they can make fun of all the social media trends going on, but in a way that will age well, let's hope. And maybe they could have some LGBT representation, but only if the writers want to. We can't just shoehorn them in for the sake of it. Hell, even on the original show, there were hints that Maggie might be bisexual.
So I'm just here for decoration? Pretty much.
So, it would be cool, but only if the writers want to see that explored in an age when same-sex relationships are now acceptable in children's media, but only in certain countries. So, yeah, there's always a catch. And hey, there's other issues they could tackle as well. For example, vinyl records have just made a comeback, so maybe we could have an episode where Maggie tries to get her music put onto vinyl, only to discover the downsides of going retro. Or, they could do an episode about a pandemic, just saying. But as it stands, it looks like the buzz on Maggie is dead in the windowsill, and a reboot will probably never happen. Time will tell though. In conclusion, I still think The Buzz on Maggie is a good show. Granted, I don't like it nearly as much as when I was a kid, but that's just the nature of growing up, maturing and watching more TV and movies. You just learn more about what makes stories good and bad, and what cliches are, and you start to notice more of the flaws and the good stuff you never noticed as a kid. Yes, there are times when the character of Maggie pisses me off, but those are few and far in between, and I still think it's a decent show with good messages. Even if they're not always executed well. The characters are fun and dynamic, with brilliant voice actors to match, the world is creative, the comedy is memorable, and it's always a nice escape whenever I'm feeling nostalgic for the mid-2000s. Plus, I think it's a good gateway drug for kids to learn about the real world and how it's sometimes good to be yourself, but a lot of the time you have to conform and do the right thing in order to fit in. If you're over the age of, say, 15, you might not get into this show, especially when there are other shows that do this better. The story isn't that deep, the characters aren't that deep, and it's largely a goofy comedy overall. But if you are of the right age, or if you're just looking for a cute waste of time that doesn't take away from your life, then this is definitely a good one to check out. But is this show really all that good? Well, in order to find out, we'll have to examine the show from antenna to abdomen, and really look at the finer details. I'll be making a series of videos where I review each individual episode, similar to Pie Guy rules in his SpongeBob reviews. And I'll give each episode a rating based on whether I think it's good, bad, or meh. So, feel free to subscribe to my channel, since next video I'll be looking at the first 6 episodes. The Flyinator, Ladybugged, Funball, The Science Whatchamacallit, The Candidate, and Jeremy. So, with that said, this is ARC the Cartoon Master, and I'm buzzing on out of here. Stay tuned.
I seem to have sewn myself to the chair.